What's up guys, Chaotic Meatball here and welcome back to another Professor Oak's Challenge. This time, it's finally here. The Professor Oak's Challenge for Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I know that you guys have been waiting a long time for this one, but it's finally here on the schedule and... Wait. Oh, I'm on the 2021 sheet. Yes, 2020 April 1st says how good was Charizard actually. Okay, well, let's just get right into that one. Charizard is probably the most popular Pokemon out of the entire franchise aside from Pikachu. It's been seen in the anime as an overpowered beast, and is one of Red's signature Pokemon in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. However, nobody has asked the question, how good was Charizard actually in the trading card game? Well, let's find out. Charizard's first printing was all the way back in the base set, being a Stage 2 with 120 HP. And even though it was reprinted in a few sets, namely Legendary Collection and Diamond and Pearl Stormfront, this one just didn't stack up. 4 fire energies to do 100 damage back then was pretty good, but it was outclassed specifically by Haymaker and Rain Dance decks. Now, I covered Rain Dance in the last video, and Charizard has a weakness to water, and because of Blastoise being water type and being able to accelerate energy as much as it wants to, it's quickly over. Since Hydro Pump can do a maximum of 60, and with weakness doubling it, Charizard was down. However, it was brought into play before Blastoise and managed to charge up. It could take down Blastoise and Fire Spin, but having to discard energy and recharge for another attack was just too slow in this current format. Haymaker also threatened Charizard, since the Scyther from Jungle and Electabuzz from base set could easily take down Charmander and Charmeleon before you could evolve up. And even if you could get a Charizard up, Haymaker also ran Gust of Wind and Plus Power so that they could keep just singling out certain basics or stage 1s on your bench, and energy removal to keep denying Charizard its attacks. The Legendary Collection reprint fared a bit better since Blastoise and Haymaker were rotated out at that point, but Muck was reprinted, and since it turned off Pokemon powers, this prevented you from turning any energy into fire energy. And since double colorless energy was rotated as well, this deck became even slower to run, therefore basically being obsolete, especially when you add in the rotation of Item Finder, Computer Search, and Professor Oak, 3 trainer cards that were basically broken since at the point of the game, there were no distinguished items in supporter cards. You could just keep slapping them down as long as you had them. There was also no really good fire types at the time that it could synergize with. So the best thing that you could do was pair with Venusaur and use grass energy to power up Fire Spin, since the Pokemon power could turn them into fire energy, but Venusaur still was able to consider it as grass energy and move them around if one of your Charizards was close to going down, but it was much slower compared to the other decks at the time. Same goes for the Stormfront reprint, since level X and lowercase EX cards were running around at the time, being able to deal out much more damage for less downside, essentially power creeping it out of the game as soon as it was reprinted. It did also get a reprint in XY Evolutions as a slightly modified Pokemon, having 150 HP instead of 120, and being able to be easily brought out thanks to cards like Rare Candy and the Wally supporter from XY Roaring Skies, or even the Talonflame from Steam Siege, as it could use Aero Blitz to search your deck for 2 cards and deal 40 damage at the same time. But this was one of the more downsides of this card, was that you had to discard 3 energies per attack instead of 2, however now it's for 200 damage rather than 100, so the extra energy makes sense. Being resistant to fighting during this meta was actually great due to strong energy being around with several fighting decks like Primal Groudon, but being weak to water made it pretty easily down to Greninja decks, which were very popular at the time, doing this card to being another collector's piece. Going back to the first generation, the Team Rocket expansions provided us with Dark Charizard, a much weaker 80 HP Charizard that relied on coin flips to do damage, which also doomed the energy to the discard if the coin flips happened to be heads. This became a pretty popular quirk with Charizard cards, making most of them pretty wonky to play without some sort of energy acceleration. And at this point, you also had Do the Wave Wigglytuff and Damage Swap Alakazam running around alongside Haymaker and Rain Dance, meaning that you basically aren't getting around them without playing a different deck. The third Charizard printed was in Gym Challenge, and it really wasn't too good either. In fact, it was inferior to Dark Charizard in terms of attacks, only being able to reliably do 20 damage plus 20 per fire energy you discarded from being attached to Charizard. So at minimum, you were doing 40 damage for a single fire energy, which was decent for the time for sure, but it just wasn't enough to keep up with previous decks mentioned. you're much better off running Blaine's Arcanine, a fire type that had a lot more synergy with the likes of Magmar from Fossil and others. Charizard was printed only once during the Gen 2 sets as Shining Charizard in Neo Destiny, a basic Pokemon as all Shining Pokemon were, but I'll just get to the point. You can't have more than one Shining Charizard in your deck, so it basically meant that this was to be a collector's piece and nothing more, basically becoming standard for Charizard by this point. It wasn't even able to be teched into decks because 5 energy, 3 fire, and 2 lightning was just too slow when stuff like Riptide for Alligator could just take advantage of the weakness. Next up are the E-series of cards, and Expedition had not just one, but 2 Charizards. The first one is pretty standard, recycling the base set Charizard's Pokemon power. Scorching Whirlwind did 120 damage for 4 energy, which you had to do 2 coin flips. If you got both heads, you got to keep all 4 fire energy on Charizard and continue your next turn, probably to knock out another Pokemon, assuming a water type didn't come in to ruin your day. But if you got Tails, you were in a bit of trouble. 1 Tails wasn't too bad, 2 energies just meant you couldn't attack on your next turn, assuming you couldn't attach 1 energy per turn. But if you got 2, you basically lost a 15th of your deck in one fell swoop. Luckily, this could be played with Venusaur from the same set, since its Poké Power would allow you to attach 2 energy to the Pokemon you gave your attachment to for the turn. So even though if you got 1 Tails, you were in a good position, assuming you had the energy in your hand. But if you got both Tails, you just weren't attacking for 1 extra turn, in the worst case scenario, so it really wasn't too bad and was used quite a lot. Clefable also helped when you get the energy you needed into your hand, so matching these 3 cards together made for a highly played combo in the weaker e-reader sets. The other Charizard was a bit weaker, having 40 damage for 1 energy, but if you flip Tails, it does nothing, and a 3 energy attack for 60 that required you to discard 1 fire energy. I'll just point out that this is the same attack that was on base set Charmeleon for 50 and discard 1. And I don't think evolving just to do 10 more damage is really worth it when you could be running the other Charizard. The Crystal Charizard from Skyridge is basically Shining Charizard 2.0, except it makes Shining Charizard look absolutely amazing in comparison to this one, since this requires fire, lightning, and fighting energy to power it up. But the Pokebody makes Charizard turn into the type that you attached for the turn, but you still have a water weakness, so you're not going to be able to fight popular Pokemon like Feraligatr. And it just couldn't keep up with the likes of Machamp and Donphan, another deck of the format. Again, just another collector's piece that is way too expensive now, with Skyridge being one of the rarest sets nowadays. During the lowercase EX block of Generation 3, Charizard was printed a total of 5 times, but some of these were actually usable. EX Dragon had a Charizard that recycled fire energy that you discarded through its first attack through coin flip, though it was still good because energy retrieval had been rotated out by this point. This allowed you to use Flame Pillar, and for 4 energy you were only doing 60, but 30 to the bench was pretty nice in this format. Decent, but it really didn't see play. A few sets later in EX Fire Red and Leaf Green, we got Charizard EX, which did an insane amount of damage. The highest HP Pokemon in the game at that time was Wailord EX at 200 HP, but Charizard did 200 damage and ignored Poké Powers, Pokebodies, weakness, resistance, basically anything that could mitigate this one from one-shotting anything in the game. This card would have been a lot better if double colorless energy was in standard at that point, but it wouldn't be reprinted until all the way in Heart Gold till Silver, so we're out of using that there. Matching this Charizard with other cards like Celio's Network and Pokemon Reversal made it easier for Charizard to get out and onto the field, and to get Pokemon in the active for it to KO with Slash as long as you're charging up for Burn Down. Overall, definitely a powerful card, but it was completely outshined from Blastoise EX from the same set, and the LBS archetype in general that ended up winning the World Championships. Next up, Charizard Delta from EX Crystal Guardians, which is both Metal and Lightning type, which is pretty interesting but also somewhat of a hindrance. Pokepower Peal of Thunder was a great power. When you play Charizard from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may look at the top 5 cards of your deck and attach as much energy as you'd like and discard the other cards. However, before Diamond and Pearl, Metal and Darkness energy were considered special energy, meaning you could only have 4 of each in your deck. So the fact that Metal Burn costed 2 of them and you had to discard them absolutely meant that you needed another way to get them out of the discard pile or to have other sources of energy. However, we had double rainbow energy, which could be used to mitigate this, since you could attach one of them and it would count as both of your metal energy, therefore allowing you to technically attack 4 turns in a row if you just so happen to get each one per turn. Also, by this point you had rare candy from EX Holon Phantoms to get Charizard out quickly, and I did end up finding a deck list which ran Flygon Delta from Holon Phantoms, omitting the metal energy for Delta Rainbow energy, giving both Flygon and Charizard easy access to energy throughout the game. However, this deck was easily dispatched by the likes of Meta Knight, a pretty popular deck at the time that could accelerate energy fairly well due to both Delta Control and Delta Charge, but we'll get to those in future videos. Charizard Gold Star unfortunately had the same fate because it's Dark type, and that means the same problem with metal energy applies here, but you still have access to Delta and Double Rainbow energy. Sadly though, it just doesn't matter since you can't have more than one Gold Star card in your deck, basically making it not very useful, especially when you have to discard 5 energy for 150 damage. Though the ability to mill 3 cards off the top of your opponent's deck is quite interesting, it just wasn't worth it for the energy sacrifice. The last Charizard of the lowercase EX block is just a regular Charizard with 1 fire for 30 and 2 fire and 2 colorless for 50 and burn. But interestingly, it says each of the defending Pokemon. This is a weird wording since it only burns the single defending Pokemon in the standard format, but at that time there were unofficial games that were able to be double battles which burned both active. Decent card, but not much thought was put into it, but a pretty neat piece of history. Onward to Generation 4, where Charizard didn't really get much love. Other than the Stormfront reprint mentioned earlier, there are 4 different Charizard cards throughout the era. However, the Charizard from Secret Wonders was one of the better ones up to this point. The Pokebody Fury Blaze allowed it to do 50 more damage to the opponent's active Pokemon if they had 3 or less prizes left. However, Blast Burn has a very similar effect to the first Expedition Charizard, since if you flipped heads, you discard 2 energy, whereas if you've got tails, you discard 4. If we're being honest, relying on coin flips is just a bad practice in Pokemon, whereas you could be running decks such as Empoleon from Diamond and Pearl base, being able to accelerate finding your Pokemon with Corsola from EX Unseen Forces, and getting Empoleon out before Charizard. Easy to see that Charizard was just completely outclassed. The next Charizard, Charizard G, and by extension Charizard G level X from Supreme Victors, was able to take advantage of the Cyrus's Conspiracy Engine, a great way of using Team Galactic cards throughout the Platinum era, as the main supporter card allowed you to grab a supporter, basic energy, and Team Galactic's Invention Trainer card and put them all into your hand, meaning that you could just keep driving cards into your hand. However, I'm just gonna say now that this card absolutely sucked. We had Bronzong G for teching into decks to move energy around the board, and match that with a coin flip that is on this card, and it's not good. If you hit Tails with Malevolent Fire, you discard all your energy attached to Charizard. Later on, you were able to accelerate energy with Ninetales from Heart Gold Soul Silver, due to it being able to get fire energy out of the discard in exchange for 1 damage counter, as well as using Energy Gain, a Team Galactic's Invention card that allowed the cost of the attack to be reduced by 1. But it was just too slow for the time to get around cards like Kingdrift from Legends Awakened and Palkia G level X that hit for weakness, leaving this Charizard in the dust. However, the last Charizard from the Gen 4 block from Platinum Arceus was used quite a bit with Ninetales and Typhlosion Prime from HS, having great search options like Pokemon Communication, Bebe Search, and Luxury Ball, along with draw power from Professor Oak's New Theory, Cynthia's Feelings, and Ninetales' Pokepower. Rescue Energy also made it so if a Pokemon was knocked out, it would go into your hand rather than to the discard. This made it much easier to keep stuff like Charizard, Ninetales, and Typhlosion up on the board, and adding cards such as Uxie from Legends Awakened allowed for you to draw up to 7 cards after putting it down on the bench. Other cards that worked well with it were Seeker from HS Triumphant, and you've got a ton of drawing power. Anyway, back to the Charizard itself, it has the Pokebody Fire Formation, which adds 10 damage to Charizard's attacks for every fire Pokemon on your bench. Meaning for 1 energy you could hit Fire Wing for a maximum of 80, which is a massive number for 1 energy, and it's pretty easy to do so when you've got so many Pokemon that are in your deck that are fire and getting them down on the field. Add on Expert Belt from the same set, and Burning Tail is able to do 150 for 3 energy but discard 1. This was a great way to get yourself rolling into one-hit KOs, with Ninetales' Roast Reveal being able to recycle said energy from the discard, it's practically unstoppable once you've got it rolling. For once, we've got a Charizard card that actually works cohesively and without burning too much energy for its own good, though it really couldn't keep that title for long. 3 years later, we finally got a new Charizard card during the Black and White block in Boundaries Crossed. It was reprinted as a Secret Rare in Plasma Storm and as a Holo in Legendary Treasures, but at the time, Capital EX Pokemon were in play, and essentially, you weren't playing a Stage 2 deck unless you were playing Keldeo EX with Blastoise from the same set. Because at this point, X-Ball Mewtwo was running wild, as well as the said Keldeo EX and Blastoise, which was the best one if you reference my last video. It just wasn't a good idea. Although cards that came later, such as an XY Flash Fire that made fire types really worthwhile, the fact that it was a Stage 2 was just the biggest problem, especially when in XY Flash Fire you could just use Charizard Dx and have a Mega Evolution as an option, so this one is just best left forgotten. Speaking of Flash Fire, we've got a whole boatload of Charizards thanks to this set. There were 2 regular Charizard EX and 2 Mega Charizard EX. On the surface, the only good one was the Stoke Charizard, as it could attach 3 energy from the deck off of a coin flip, and it could do 120 damage the next turn with a discard of 1. It's actually not too bad with paired up with cards like Fiery Torch and Blacksmith, which could help with discarding additional fire energy and straight up attaching them all to Charizard. It helped with not having to rely on a coin flip, and reliably doing 120 was pretty decent for the time, but not reliable enough to get KOs on EXs in one shot, especially X-Ball Mewtwo, which preyed on attackers with a ton of energy. There were counters such as Lysander, which could drag it out of the active in place of something else, but you were just delaying the inevitable at that point, whereas X-Ball Mewtwo with 5 energy could just take you straight out without problems. The other Charizard in the set was actually quite a good tech card, as Wing Attack for 3 colorless for 60 was great because you could just put it into any deck and you would be able to hit for fire weakness. So decks relying on Virizion and Genesect DX from Plasma Blast would be scared if they saw one of these come into play. However, both Charizards are weak to Seismitoad from Furious Fists, which completely ruled the format once it was released with Water Toolbox, and still works well and expanded to this day. Add on to the fact that we didn't get a Charizard Spirit Link for the Mega Evolutions until Evolutions, and it was basically over. Evolutions wasn't even in the same standard rotation as Flash Fire, so the Dragon Mega was useless. If only it was reprinted as well, we could have had Spirit Link, Double Dragon Energy from Roaring Skies, and Charizard X running over everything while milling 5 cards every turn, but alas, my dreams aren't allowed to come true. There was also a promo Charizard released around this time, but it was even worse than the other 2 in Flash Fire, and that's not even worth talking about, which is a shame. Charizard cards should be good for being such an iconic Pokemon. The same problems came with the Generations Charizard. It was an uncommon Radiant Collection card that was a Stage 2, meaning it was run through easily, and the unique EX from the same set was plagued by low damage output and coin flips, as well as a water weakness, which wasn't good because Greninja from XY Breakpoint came in and totally ruined it, as well as the new Mega, which was also Fire type. The fact that we still didn't have a Spirit Link for Charizard, Blastoise, or Venusaur basically made them all useless right out of the gate from Generations, so they didn't receive any play whatsoever other than casually. But even then, I'm sure people went for other decks that didn't rely on luck, like coin flips. Charizard Spirit Link was eventually printed in Evolutions, but it still just wasn't used since all of the fire support from Flash Fire had been rotated out, so it was just not worth it. Onto the Sun and Moon block, there were a few Charizard GX cards, as well as 3 regular Charizards, so let's get those out of the way first. Dragon Majesty has a Charizard with 160 HP, but with a weakness to water, puts it in risk against the likes of Empoleon from Ultra Prism, as well as Greninja GX, but there's a lot of advantages for it to take advantage of. Kiawe gives you 4 energy attachments in exchange for ending your turn, and matching it with Ho-Oh GX gives you a pretty heavy-hitting deck. However, what you're probably interested in is the ability. For every GX and EX your opponent has in play, this Pokemon does 30 more damage, and when EXs and GXs are running around like crazy, especially Tapu Lele for supporter recovery, you're more than likely going to deal out 160, sometimes even 190 and 220 for those GX heavy decks. And 190 is a key number for hitting things like Lapras GX and Buzzwole GX, or 220 for Zoroark and Silvally. Match that with the likes of Choice Band, which gives you another 30 damage to EX and GX Pokemon, and this Charizard ran through them like wildfire. However, the Dragon Majesty Charizard did not receive as much play as the Team Up Charizard, which is quite great. The ability allows you to attach 2 Fire Energy from your deck to Charizard in exchange for 20 damage once per turn, which is a great ability paired with its second attack, which only costs 2 Fire Energy, which says to discard all energy from Charizard, and this attack does 50 more for each energy discarded in this way. That's 130 for 2 energies to take out non-GX Pokemon in the format such as Granbull, White Kyurem, and Buzzwole. But you can attach 1 for your turn as well, getting up to 180 and taking out the likes of Blacephalon and Tapu Lele GX, some very popular Pokemon of the format. Slap a Choice Band on there and down goes just about every playable GX of the time, aside from maybe even Gardevoir, making it really fun. Another great card for Charizard decks at the time was Victini Prism Star, seeing as its attack would allow you to shuffle every single Fire Energy from your discard back into your deck. So as you're burning through them, you can use this card and attack for 20 times the amount of Fire Energy in your discard, which can get up to Charizard levels of damage if you discarded 10 or 11 of them. This can also be teched into Chandelure decks of the time as well, seeing as for 1 energy you're able to discard the top 5 cards of your deck, doing 60 damage for each Pokemon you discard. But then you get to put any fire Pokemon you discarded right onto your bench, so you can potentially cheat 2 to 3 Charizards out of the bench. Another great card that was run with it was Fairy-type Alolan Ninetales GX, which allowed you to get 2 item cards into your hand after evolving from Vulpix, getting you enough items to set up and get rolling, so this Charizard was definitely one of the better cards. And it seemed like, with time, Charizard just kept getting better. Either that or the format just fits Charizard much better in the more recent years. Might I add that this Charizard was also used for a theme deck? Yeah, this one's really fun to play for sure. There are 3 regular Charizard GXs, the first of which is from Burning Shadows, and it's a Stage 2 Fire type, which automatically meant that water box decks like Lapras were just gonna run over it. Greninja could easily overrun it as well in the 2017 to 2018 standard format, as well as the Breakpoint Garbodor for locking out item cards like Rare Candy. The first attack on it, 3 colorless for 70, isn't really too good by this point, since instead of being a basic Pokemon like Charizard Dx with Wing Attack from XY Flashfire, it's a Stage 2, so it's not as easy to tech in, but that's not what we're here for. We've got Crimson Storm, which is 5 energy for 300 and discard 3. This legitimately knocks out everything in the format he's included in. Wailord DX with Fighting Fury Belt at the tail end of 2016 to 2017? Gone. Any GX in the format with buff padding? Gone. And getting energy on Charizard actually isn't that hard. The 2016 to 2017 format still had access to Max Elixir, so you could attempt to get the Fire Energy on your first turn if you're going second, and attach a double colorless to Charmander, Rare Candy to Charizard, and attack for 300 damage and an easy KO on the first attackable turn. Match this with the likes of Kiawe on the first turn of the game, and you've got yourself a ridiculously strong attacker. Not to mention the GX attack that allows you to discard the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck. If it's late game, you could potentially deck them out and win the game with this attack. Or if you don't have any other GX attacks worth using, you could just use this to get rid of a ton of your opponent's resources, which is quite fun. Match this with something like Team Rocket's Handiwork from Fates Collide during the 2016 to 2017 format, and you've got yourself a possible turn of discarding 14 cards from your opponent. Heck, if you want to go the whole milling route with Crimson Storm being the second option, including Beware from Burning Shadows would allow you to flip a coin, if heads, discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Combine that with Victini from Guardians Rising that allows you to reflip coins for a better result, and you've got something relatively consistent here. Of course, this wasn't actually used and this was hypothetical, aside from maybe casual League decks, but there were many combos that this Charizard could pull off and do it well. The second Charizard is from Hidden Fates. Yeah, that special set that you could get the Shining Charizard that everybody and their grandmother wants. Yeah, except this Charizard isn't the Burning Shadows Charizard, and it sucks. 4 energy for 140 or for 300 for that 1-turn GX if you want to do so. There's no flavor text, it's just straight up damage with no discarding. However, if played with the Mewtwo and Mew GX from Unified Minds along with Welder, it can copy Flare Blitz GX, essentially knocking out anything you need to at any point in the game. Of course, this is just a one attack out of an entire deck, but it does come in handy, so the Hidden Fates Charizard is useful as a surrogate, but not as its actual attacker. Lastly, the Detective Pikachu subset has a regular Charizard as well as a Charizard GX. The regular Charizard, not worth it. It does damage to itself, and it's not really as good as the previous two. Also, Charizard GX is an inferior version of the Burning Shadows one at first glance, seeing as you could deal 200 damage without any discards, which sounds great at first, and with Joyce Band, it can work for KOing many GXs like Zoroark, Buzzwole, Lapras, Blacephalon, and Gardevoir. But with buff padding, any Pokemon with a retreat cost of 4 can get an extra 50 HP. So either tool works well depending on what your deck is trying to go for a winning strategy. After looking up games on TCGO, I actually managed to see this working with a team-up Charizard and managed to beat a Zoroark GX deck, so they are usable, just not high tier like the 5 previously mentioned GXs. Especially the likes of Gardevoir, which can prey upon Pokemon with higher energy amounts due to Infinite Force doing 150 based on your 5 energy, and if they have 4 attached, bam, down goes Charizard. And you can only one-shot if you have Choice Band. Still, great Charizard, but not as good as these last two. 2 more Charizards left in the Sun and Moon block, those being Tag Team GXs. The first is probably the most played Charizard out of all currently released, and that being Reshiram and Charizard GX. First attack is a staple for Reshiram all the way back since the Black and White base set, that being Outrage, 30 damage plus 10 for each damage counter on Reshiram and Charizard. Decent for Pokemon that can't one-hit KO you, since it has 270 HP, that's probably not going to happen, making this a great in-between attack from when you can't use its second attack, which does 230, but you can't use it on your next turn. The GX attack is great though. 200 damage for 3 energy isn't special, but it can do 300 if you have 6 energy attached, and it's not affected by any effects on the defending Pokemon, meaning it's basically taking down anything that isn't a VMAX card. This can easily be paired with the likes of Salazzle and its ability to discard a fire energy from your hand and draw 3 cards. Match this with Heat Factory Prism Star to do the same thing twice, and Victini Prism Star, and you're basically recycling cards for extra draw power. Volcanion is also great for drawing out energy on your first turn, since it can search for 3 fire energy on your first turn if you're going second, and attach them all to Reshiram and Charizard. What a nice deal! Slapping Kiawe in with this Charizard is a must, as well as Welder, which can allow you to attach 2 fire energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon and draw 3 cards. This is Flash Fire support on steroids, everyone. Fire Crystal matches that as well, since you can put 3 fire energy from your discard into your hand, and this will become a staple as soon as Victini Prism Star is rotated out, which is likely to happen in the 20-21 standard format. This deck doesn't use Cynthia either, so there's no worries once it gets rotated out along with Victini, meaning this deck will likely thrive unless Lapras V becomes powerful to a point that it becomes irrelevant and the weakness is too much to handle. Overall, probably the best Charizard card, but being a tag team doesn't really mean that Charizard is doing it on its own. It needs its help to be good. However, it did help win the World Championships in 2019 in the Seniors Division, and made runner-up in the Juniors Division, so it's definitely amazing. Lastly is Charizard and Braixen Gx, which actually matches up with Reshiram and Charizard GX quite nicely. It's a basic, which all Tag Team GXs are, and it does 180 for 4 energy, meaning it's knocking out Blacephalon and Rayquaza GX, and it can search out 3 cards from your deck, which is also amazing. And the GX attack allows you to attach 5 basic energy from your discard to your Pokemon in any way you'd like. It runs well with the likes of Turtonator from Dragon Majesty and Heatran GX, along with the Dedenne GX from Unbroken Bonds, which is basically a nerfed Shaman EX from Roaring Skies, and you're basically getting set up really quickly, making the second of the 2 Tag Team GXs quite good. So, how good was Charizard actually in the TCG? Well, it started off like trash. It was just too clunky to work in the base set, Team Rocket, Gym Challenge, and Neo Destiny, but it had a pretty decent card in Expedition, meaning that it finally kinda got its stride along with Venusaur, and just kept being bad until Platinum, where it legitimately had the worst level X card ever printed in Rising Rivals, but brought itself back from the brink through the Fire Formation Charizard from Arceus. After that, though, it kinda fell off the wagon again through the Black and White block, coming out here and there in the XY block until a whole slew of good Charizards came out during the Sun and Moon block. With Charizard V and VMAX being released and coming to the US in a few months, I'm sure it'll probably be taking a hit thanks to Victini, Prism Star, and Kiawe being rotated, with the likes of Welder and Fire Crystal remaining, and being able to use Triple Acceleration Energy and Vitality Band to take out Zacian and V in one shot, I'm sure that people will attempt to make it work for the next format. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you ended up getting through it thinking that it was the Heart Gold Soul Silver POC and that you were set the whole way through it, I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you were intrigued enough in this video to decide to just hang around. I am kind of sad that I had to do that joke just to get people to be interested in this, but it's okay, because April Fool's Day, I have an excuse. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll give you guys an actual POC on Friday.